Hi friends, today we are making marranitos. They are also known as puerquitos. This is a Mexican sweet bread, better described as Mexican gingerbread cookies with a bread texture. They are so delicious and are best paired with café de olla or chocolate abuelita. Today I'm showing you the recipe, so let's get started. This is what we're going to need to make these gingerbread pigs. We have all-purpose flour, baking powder and baking soda, ginger and ground cinnamon, brown sugar, and you can also use light brown sugar or dark brown sugar, whole milk. We also have molasses, or you can also use dark corn syrup, vanilla, unsalted butter, and eggs. The first thing we need to do is place all of the dry ingredients into a bowl, and I'm going to use a whisk to mix all of them thoroughly. In this bowl, I have all-purpose flour, ginger, cinnamon, baking powder, and baking soda. And once it is all mixed together, we're going to set it to the side for later. Now let's put the butter in the mixing bowl, and we're going to mix the butter to make it creamy. Remember that your butter or any of the ingredients that you are using should be at room temperature. After a few minutes, I'm also going to add in the brown sugar and continue mixing both of these ingredients together. And while my mixer is still on, I'm going to add in the eggs one at a time, just to make sure that all of the ingredients have the necessary time to make sure to incorporate into one another. Make sure to pause from time to time to scrape the edges of the bowl, just to make sure that all of the ingredients incorporate and don't stick to the sides of the bowl. After a few minutes, I'm going to stop the mixer and add in my whole milk, vanilla, and also add in the molasses, and I'm going to continue mixing until all of these ingredients have a chance to incorporate once again. I like to mix all of the wet ingredients first, just to make sure that when we add in the flour, being the dry ingredients, we don't overmix and cause the dough to be too tough. So it's better to do it this way. That way when we add in the flour, the only thing left to add in or mix in is the flour, so there's less potential for error. Now I'm going to add in the flour a little at a time. Then I'm going to continue to mix. Then I'm going to stop and add in more flour. And basically, I like to add in the flour a little at a time, just to see how the dough changes. And then at the end, when you add in the last of the flour, make sure to not overmix. So we want to stop when we no longer see flour in the batter. You're going to notice that the consistency of the dough will be soft and a bit sticky and pliable. This will not be a hard dough, so to roll it out, we will need a non-stick surface or flour to make sure that the dough doesn't stick to the rolling pin or the surface or your hands. And while you're mixing this, you're going to notice that because it is going to stick to the sides of your bowl, and it's also going to stick to the attachment of your mixer, or if you're doing this by hand, it will be sticking to your hands, but that's perfectly fine because that is exactly the consistency that we are looking for. To roll out my gingerbread pigs, I'm using a non-stick silicone mat from Dough Easy, and although it is a non-stick mat, I'm still dusting the mat with flour as an extra level of protection. And just in case you've guys seen me use this mat before, there is rolling guides that come with this mat, but for this dough we're just going to eyeball the thickness because again, we're not going for a perfectly flat cookie, because you will notice that these pigs will become a little bit puffy, so you don't need to make them perfectly flat. That's why I'm skipping out on using the rolling guides, and I'm just going to eyeball the thickness of these cookies. Before I place the top part of the silicone mat, I'm also going to dust the top of my dough with some flour, like I mentioned, as added protection. And once the dough is on the mat, I'm going to roll it out as even as possible. And what I usually like to do is I like to have a thickness of 1/2 inch of thickness, or you can also go as thin as 1/4 inch thick, because like I mentioned before, this dough will become puffy and it will thicken up during the baking process. When you do cut it, you will kind of think what I thought and say like, oh my god, these are too thin, but trust me, they will puff up in the oven. And here you can see when I try to take the top layer of the silicone mat, you're going to notice that the dough sticks a little bit to the mat. That is completely fine. This happens because we are using molasses and brown sugar, so the dough will be a lot stickier than normal cookie dough. And also, this pig cutter is from Ann Clark, but I do sell these cutters in my Etsy shop, so be sure to visit the links in the description box. I also sell a lot more different molds and cookie cutters there, but for this cookie I'm using this pig cutter. You can certainly cut them out by hand, but I do recommend using a cutter because it will be a much faster process. And as with any cookies, if you do have any remaining dough, you can simply roll it back together and then flatten it out and continue to cut until you finish cutting out the entire set of your dough for these pig cookies. Also, as a side note, to prevent the cutter from sticking to the dough, I like to dip the cutter into flour and then cut the dough. I usually do this every 4 to 5 cookies to make sure that the cutting is more smooth. And when I am cutting out sugar cookies to decorate with royal icing, I like to dip my cutters in powdered sugar. Simply because I don't want the taste of flour to be there. I prefer the powdered sugar, but that's just a little side note. Here's a closer look at the thickness of these pigs. They will double or triple in size as far as puffiness goes, so just keep that in mind. I was able to place 12 pigs in a baking sheet, and you can also line your baking sheet with a non-stick silicone mat like I did here, or parchment paper. And before we do glaze our pigs, let's turn on our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And with a baking brush, let's brush our pigs with egg wash. So this is basically 1 egg that has been whisked. And what this is going to do is this is going to help our pigs form a skin during baking, and it's going to make them shiny and prevent burning or drying out while they bake. After we're through glazing all of our pigs, we are going to bake our ginger pigs for 10 to 12 minutes or until they look puffy and golden. This is how my ginger pigs or marranitos turned out, y'all. They look so wrinkly here because I was doing an experiment and I baked them at a lower temperature, but they still came out tasty. And here's a sneak peek at the inside. A little tip to removing them from your silicone mat or your parchment paper is to use a spatula just to make sure that they don't stick to your baking paper or silicone mat. I did bring these pigs to Andres's mini graduation social distance celebration, and everyone loved them. Thank you so much for supporting me by watching this video. Please remember to share my video, leave a comment to let YouTube know that you enjoy my content, and don't forget to subscribe. I love you, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!